Captain Rachel Donovan peered through the reinforced windscreen of her Black Hawk as 300 American soldiers fought for their lives 5 kilometers deep inside Valmore Ridge, trapped under relentless enemy fire with no air support and no path to retreat. Command had ordered every aircraft to hold position, labeling extraction as suicide because of the dense anti-aircraft defenses blanketing the area. Yet, Rachel listened to Colonel Dean Mercer's voice crackle through the radio, every transmission more desperate than the last. Casualties rising, ammunition nearly gone, and she realized she had only 2 choices: save those soldiers or sacrifice her career. She tightened her grip on the controls, already knowing which path she'd take. Orders or not, she was flying into that kill zone, because sometimes the gap between obedience and what's right is measured in 300 lives waiting for a pilot brave enough to bring them home. What had begun as a routine reconnaissance and support mission had turned into a nightmare. Colonel Mercer's battalion, 300 troops from the 2nd Infantry Division, had pushed into the disputed borderlands to confirm reports of enemy buildups that intelligence believed were preparing for an offensive. On paper, it was supposed to be simple: advance, gather data, neutralize small threats, and pull back before resistance could organize. They had tanks for support, artillery on standby, and air units ready for both fire cover and emergency evacuation. But the intelligence had failed catastrophically. At 800 hours, Mercer's men moved into what seemed like a lightly held sector. By AO 900, they made contact with an enemy screening unit that fought briefly and then retreated. Tactical doctrine suggested the opposing force was disengaging to avoid full confrontation. By 1000 hours, that illusion shattered. The battalion had walked straight into a meticulously prepared kill box. Over 2,000 enemy fighters, heavily armed, well dug, and equipped with armor, had deliberately let the Americans advance before sealing the trap shut. Mercer's 300 soldiers were suddenly encircled, deep inside hostile ground, bullets slicing from every direction, facing a force that outnumbered them nearly 7-1. Mercer's immediate response was to radio for artillery strikes and air evacuation support. Artillery shells thundered down on enemy positions, giving Colonel Mercer's battalion just enough breathing room to form a defensive ring. But Rachel knew artillery alone couldn't save them. The enemy had too many troops, too much armor, and complete dominance over the terrain. They desperately needed air power to break free. Helicopter gunships to knock out tanks, suppress heavy weapons, and transport birds to haul out the wounded, or, if things got worse, pull out the entire battalion before they were crushed. But the opposition had predicted that move. The moment American aircraft approached the zone, they were met by a storm of anti-aircraft fire, radar-guided cannons, surface-to-air missiles, and a wall of small arms fire blazing from every ridge and tree line. 2 Apache gunships attempting close support had taken hits and were forced to retreat. A medevac chopper trying to reach the wounded was struck by a missile and barely limped back to friendly territory. At 1100 hours, command issued the call that sealed the battalion's fate. All helicopter missions in the region were suspended until the anti-aircraft network could be neutralized. From headquarters, it was a rational, tactical decision. Sending more aircraft into that sky was suicide. Losing crews wouldn't change the outcome for the men already surrounded, but for the 300 soldiers trapped on the ground, that rational decision was a death sentence. At Forward Base Falcon, 20 kilometers from the chaos, Captain Rachel Donovan was tracking the unfolding disaster. As part of the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the legendary Night Stalkers, she flew a custom MH-60 Blackhawk built for missions most pilots wouldn't even consider. Her bird carried advanced avionics, reinforced armor, missile warning systems, and engines tuned for maximum performance under fire. She had hundreds of flight hours in combat zones where survival depended on skill, instinct, and nerve. So, when she heard that air support for Mercer's battalion had been officially grounded, she didn't hesitate. Rachel stormed into the operations center to confront her commanding officer, Colonel Tessa Vance. "Ma'am, is it true we've suspended flights to Mercer's unit?" she asked sharply. Vance, standing over a glowing tactical display showing the shrinking American perimeter, didn't look up. "Confirmed. The airspace is a death trap. 2 Apaches are already damaged, and 1 medevac barely made it back. Until we knock out those SAMs, no one flies in there." "How long until we suppress them?" Rachel pressed. "Fixed-wing strikes are being coordinated," Vance replied, rubbing her temple. "But the enemy's too close to our guys. We can't risk airstrikes without hitting friendlies. Best estimate, 4 to 6 hours before we can open a safe corridor." Rachel stared at the map, watching the red markers representing enemy positions creep inward from every side. "Ma'am, with all due respect, that battalion doesn't have 4 to 6 hours," she said quietly. "The enemy knows we can't get aircraft in. They'll hit them hard before we even have the chance to act. They're going to press their advantage and try to finish this before we can intervene," Vance said. "I know that, Captain, but I'm not sending helicopters and crews into certain death. We've already lost too many aircraft today." Rachel's reply was steady. "My Black Hawk has upgraded defensive suites, missile warning receivers, infrared, countermeasures, and radar warning systems. I've flown in worse environments. I can get them." Colonel Tessa Vance shook her head and held firm. "Captain Donovan, I understand you want to help, but the answer is no. The risk is unacceptable. We wait for air defense suppression and then move in with proper support. If the battalion is overrun before then, yes, it would be a tragedy, but we won't make it worse by throwing helicopters and crews into a futile rescue." Rachel wanted to argue, but the decision was final. She saluted and left the ops center, her mind already running through fuel calculations, approach vectors, defensive maneuvers, and whether a single skilled Black Hawk crew could thread that anti-aircraft needle. Over the next hour, the situation worsened. Colonel Dean Mercer's radio painted a bleaker picture with each transmission. Ammo nearly gone, wounded overwhelming field medics, enemy armor moving into assault positions, the defensive ring shrinking under unrelenting pressure. At 12:15 hours, Mercer sent what sounded like a last-ditch sitrep. "All stations, this is Ironside Actual. We are surrounded on all sides, ammunition down to approximately 30 rounds per man, enemy armor positioning for final assault. We've held for 3 hours, but without immediate support we will be overrun within the next hour. If any aircraft can reach us, now is the time. Ironside Actual out." Rachel stood in the hangar bay staring at her Black Hawk, Mercer's words echoing in her head, and she made her choice. Chief Warrant Officer Miles Trent fell into step beside her. "You're thinking about it, aren't you?" he asked. "Thinking about what?" she answered. "Going in anyway, ignoring orders and flying into that kill zone." Rachel didn't answer at first. "Finally," she said, voice low. 300 soldiers, Miles. 300 Americans who will be dead within the hour if nobody moves." "We've got a helicopter," he said. "We've got the training. We've got countermeasures that give us a shot. We also have explicit orders telling us not to go," Rachel reminded him. "Orders based on command's assessment from 20 kilometers away, looking at tactical displays. We're pilots who've flown the worst," Miles said quietly. "We know what this Black Hawk can do, and we know what we can do." He fell silent for a beat. "If we do this, our careers are finished. Disobeying direct orders, unauthorized flight into hostile territory, operating without mission approval, That's court-martial territory." "I know," Rachel said. "So the question is, are 300 lives worth our careers?" She looked him straight in the eye. "That's not really a question, is it?" Miles gave a small, rueful smile. "No, it isn't. When do we launch?" "As soon as pre-flight's done and we've got clearance to taxi," Rachel answered. "We'll request clearance for a training flight, get airborne, and then head for Mercer's coordinates before anyone realizes what we've done. They'll order us back, we'll shut off the radios and blame a comms failure." 20 minutes later, Rachel and Miles finished pre-flight checks on their Black Hawk. Rachel keyed the radio. "Falcon Tower. Night Stalker 7-1 requesting taxi clearance for local training." The controller answered routine. "Night Stalker 7-1, taxi to Pad 3 for training departure." Rachel taxied to the pad, ran final checks and called again. "Falcon Tower. Night Stalker 7-1 ready for departure. Night Stalker 7-1 cleared for takeoff. Maintain training area boundaries. Contact approach on button 4. Rachel raised the collective, applied power, and eased the Black Hawk into hover, then transitioned to forward flight, climbing and accelerating away from forward base Falcon. Once clear of the base, Miles spoke softly. "Last chance to change your mind." "Once we turn toward Mercer's position, we're committed," Rachel said, and set a new heading straight for the surrounded battalion. 300 soldiers wouldn't get to change their fate on their own. "Let's go get them." For the first 5 minutes, everything was normal. Then the tower crackled. "Night Stalker 7-1, you are deviating from the approved training area. Correct your heading immediately." Rachel made no reply. "Night Stalker 7-1, Falcon Tower, you are ordered to return to base immediately. Acknowledge." Rachel reached down and killed the radio. "Communications failure," she told Miles. "We can't hear them." Miles smiled despite the tension. Perfect timing for that failure. The Black Hawk raced low across the terrain at 140 knots to reduce radar exposure. Rachel flew with the instinctive precision born of thousands of hours in helicopters, reading contours, modulating altitude for cover, constantly varying speed and vector to make the aircraft a hard target. 10 minutes into the run, Rachel's radar warning receiver started screaming. Enemy radar had painted them, and moments later the missile warning tone blared. "Surface-to-air missile launch detected," Miles called. "Missile launch 3 o'clock," as he tracked the threat on his screens. Rachel ripped the cyclic hard right, slammed the bird toward the ground and spat out infrared flares to seduce the heat seeker away. The Black Hawk's uprated engines and flight controls let her pull moves a standard transport couldn't manage. The missile chased the flares and detonated harmlessly 200 meters away. "Missile defeated," Miles said, but they both knew now the enemy had them on their list. "How far to Mercer's position?" Rachel asked. 12 kilometers, 7 minutes at this speed," Miles answered. 7 minutes that felt like an eternity. The Black Hawk tore toward the surrounded battalion under a hail of fire, small arms cracks, whipping past the fuselage. Anti-aircraft batteries stitched the sky with exploding shell patterns. Rachel fought through it using aggressive defensive piloting, constantly varying altitude, speed, and heading, slaloming the terrain for cover, and burning through every evasive trick she'd learned. Another SAM went up. She kicked left, vaulted upward, spat chaff and flares, then dove back down. The missile lost lock and self-destructed. 5 clicks, Miles called. Enemy formations came into view. Through the windscreen, Rachel could make out the battlefield. A battered American ring maybe 400 meters across, hemmed in by enemy forces on every side. Smoke from wrecked vehicles clawed into the sky, tracer fire stitched the air, and explosions pocked the ground as artillery and armor hammered the perimeter. "I'm going straight in," Rachel said. "Fast approach. Land in the center of their ring." "Load as many wounded as we can, then get out," Miles answered. "It's going to be tight. Enemies within small arms range will be taking fire the whole time." "Keep eyes on threats and call them out," Rachel ordered, and she shoved the Blackhawk to maximum speed, diving toward Mercer's coordinates from a vector the enemy wouldn't expect. The sky around them lit with anti-aircraft bursts, but Rachel threaded the gaps with precise, aggressive flying that kept the aircraft unpredictable. As they closed on the perimeter, she switched to the battalion frequency. "Ironside Actual. This is Night Stalker 71 inbound for emergency extraction. Mark your perimeter and prepare wounded for immediate loading." "Mark your perimeter and prepare wounded for immediate loading," Rachel ordered. A moment later, Colonel Mercer's voice crackled through the radio, disbelief bleeding through the static. "Night Stalker 71. Say again? We were told no air assets were available." "Ironside Actual. That's correct. None were authorized. We're here anyway. Mark your perimeter now." Within seconds, bursts of colored smoke billowed from the center of the American defensive line, signaling a landing zone barely 50 meters across. Tight, but it would have to do. Rachel aligned her approach and dove toward the smoke as rounds slammed into the fuselage, the sound of metallic pings echoing through the cockpit. One bullet struck close, spiderwebbing the windshield. "Taking hits," Miles called out, eyes on flashing warnings. Multiple systems showing minor damage. "We're committed," Rachel said evenly. "Prepare for a hot landing." She dropped the Blackhawk fast and hard, less a landing than a controlled crash designed to get them on the ground before enemy gunners could adjust. The instant the wheels hit dirt, soldiers sprinted toward the aircraft, dragging the wounded. The crew chief and gunners laid down suppressive fire, cutting through enemy muzzle flashes that threatened the open zone. Rachel kept the engines screaming at high power, ready for an immediate lift. Through the canopy, she saw the devastation. Burning vehicles, makeshift trenches, medics working under fire. Exhausted men and women firing back at shadows closing in. Then Colonel Mercer himself appeared. Uniform shredded and stained, face etched with exhaustion from hours of combat. He climbed into the Blackhawk's bay where wounded were being loaded and pushed through to the cockpit. "Captain, I don't know who authorized this, but you just saved lives," he shouted over the roar. "We've got roughly 40 critically wounded who need evac now." "We can take 15 max if we pack them in," Rachel called back. "Load them tight." "You can't make multiple trips," Mercer warned. "They'll zero in and kill you on the second run." "Then we'll make as many trips as it takes before that happens," she replied. Mercer studied her for a moment, then nodded grimly and jumped back out to coordinate loading. Moments later, the crew chief yelled forward, "Captain, we're at capacity. 15 wounded on board. Can't take more." Rachel grabbed the radio. "Ironside Actual. We're loaded and lifting now. We'll be back for the rest as soon as we can." "Night Stalker 71. You are not authorized for multiple trips. Get those wounded back to base and remain there," Mercer's voice ordered. "That's an order from me, as the senior officer on this battlefield." Rachel's reply was steady over the roar of the engines. "Ironside Actual, with respect, I'm already violating orders by being here. Might as well get court-martialed for doing it right. See you in 15 minutes, she added, and pulled collective, lifting the overloaded Blackhawk out of the hot LZ. The bird was heavy, well beyond rated limits with 15 wounded plus crew, and it responded sluggishly. Enemy fire intensified as they climbed away. Miles called out through the alarms. Multiple hits. A warning light blinked. Hydraulic pressure dropping in the aft system. Rachel fought the controls harder as handling degraded. Another alarm screamed. oil pressure falling on engine 2. Number 2 engine compromised, Miles reported. Recommend shutting it down. Negative, Rachel said. We need both engines to hold altitude and speed. We'll fly it until it quits. The Black Hawk limped from the battlefield, trailing smoke from the damaged engine while Rachel wrestled the increasingly stubborn controls. The 15 wounded in the cabin lay silent, too wrecked by injury or exhaustion to react. 10 bone-stretching minutes of tense system checks and shrinking performance later, Rachel set the damaged helicopter down at Forward Base Falcon. Medics swarmed the aircraft and hauled the wounded off for immediate care. Before Rachel could cut the engines, Colonel Tessa Vance stood at the cockpit door, thunder written across her face. Captain Donovan, shut those engines down immediately. You are grounded pending disciplinary action. Rachel kept the bird running and finished post-flight checks anyway. Ma'am, I need to refuel and go back for more wounded, she said. You are not going anywhere, Vance replied. You disobeyed direct orders, flew an unauthorized mission into hostile territory, and endangered your crew and aircraft contrary to explicit instructions. You're done flying today, Captain. Rachel looked Vance in the eye. There are 25 more critically wounded at Mercer's position who will die without evacuation. This Black Hawk can make at least one more trip before maintenance grounds it. Are you going to stop me from saving them? She turned to Miles. Miles, you heard the Colonel's order. If you want to shut down the engines and end this, I'll understand. But if you're with me, I'm going back for more wounded. Miles didn't blink. We came this far. Let's finish the job. Rachel faced Vance again. Ma'am, you can court-martial me when we get back. Right now, I'm going back to that battlefield. She advanced the throttles and prepared to lift off. Colonel Vance stared at her for 5 long seconds that felt like an eternity, then exhaled sharply and made the decision that would mark her own career. If you're going back anyway, you're not going alone. I'm authorizing a full extraction with gunship cover. But you're still grounded afterward, Captain. This conversation isn't over. She stepped away from the Black Hawk and began barking orders. Get me 2 Apaches prepped for immediate launch. Coordinate with artillery for supporting fire. We're pulling that whole battalion out before they're overrun. Over the next 2 hours, Captain Rachel Donovan flew 3 more runs into Mercer's position, each time landing under hellish fire to load wounded soldiers. Apache gunships roared overhead, tearing through enemy lines, while artillery thundered in support. By the 3rd trip, fixed-wing aircraft had joined in, finally silencing the anti-aircraft batteries that had held them back all day. On her 4th run, ground reinforcements reached the battlefield and began pushing through the encirclement, turning the tide. The crisis had broken. The battalion would survive. But those first 15 soldiers Rachel had lifted out, they would have died waiting for permission. The decision to break orders had saved lives that bureaucracy would have written off. When she finally powered down the Black Hawk after her 4th mission, Rachel was beyond exhausted, physically drained, mentally spent, hands trembling on the controls. Her helicopter was a battered wreck, one engine coughing its last breaths, hydraulics leaking, the airframe punctured by dozens of holes. Colonel Vance stood waiting on the tarmac. Captain Donovan, you're officially relieved of flight duty pending investigation into your actions today. Report to my office at 800 tomorrow for formal proceedings. Yes, ma'am, Rachel replied, then added softly, Off the record? Vance's expression softened slightly. Off the record. You saved a lot of lives today, but you also broke the backbone of military discipline. I honestly don't know whether to recommend you for a medal or a court-martial. Rachel looked her straight in the eye. Ma'am, with respect, I don't care which. Those soldiers are alive. That's what matters. 3 days later, Rachel stood at attention before a formal military board. The hearing was presided over by Brigadier General Ethan Ward, a career aviator known for his unbending adherence to regulations. "Captain Donovan," Ward began, his voice firm, "you are here because you willfully disobeyed direct orders, conducted an unauthorized flight into a designated no-fly zone, endangered your crew and aircraft, and operated outside mission parameters. These are serious violations. How do you respond?" "Sir," Rachel said clearly, "I acknowledge I disobeyed orders. I flew without authorization, put my crew at risk, and broke protocol. Those facts aren't in dispute." "Then you understand the gravity of your actions?" "Yes, sir." "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Rachel took a slow breath, choosing her words carefully. "Sir, I understand that military discipline exists for a reason," Rachel began steadily. "I understand that orders are in place to maintain structure and safety. But I also understood that 300 American soldiers were going to die if no one intervened. And I had the means to intervene. I made a judgment call that saving those lives outweighed following orders that would have condemned them." General Ethan Ward leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp. "Captain, the military can't function if every officer decides which orders to obey based on personal judgment. What you did sets a dangerous precedent." "I agree, sir," Rachel replied. "If every pilot disobeyed orders on a whim, it would be chaos. But this wasn't a matter of disagreement. It was about recognizing that the situation had changed beyond what command understood from their screens, and immediate action was required to prevent a massacre." Ward's expression hardened. "That's a convenient justification." "It's not a justification, it's what happened," Rachel said firmly. "Command was 20 kilometers away, making decisions off data feeds. I was there, monitoring the battle in real time. I had information and perspective they didn't." Ward flipped open a folder on his desk. "I've read Colonel Mercer's after-action report. He wrote, and I quote, 'Captain Donovan's unauthorized extraction flight arrived at the exact moment when my battalion's situation had become critical. Without her intervention, we would have lost at least 40 men to their wounds before authorized support could reach us. Her actions, while technically violating orders, were tactically and morally correct given the circumstances." He reached for another document. "I also have a letter signed by all 300 members of Mercer's battalion, thanking you for saving their lives and asking that you not face disciplinary action." Ward set the papers down and studied her. "Here's my dilemma, Captain. By regulation, I should recommend court-martial for your actions. But by any reasonable measure of outcome, you made the right call. You saved lives that would have been lost to excessive caution." He paused, folding his hands. "So, here's what I'm going to do. I'll recommend a formal letter of reprimand be placed in your record for disobeying direct orders. That will likely end your chances of future command or promotion. Your career, as far as advancement goes, is over." Rachel stayed silent, her jaw tight. "However," Ward continued, "I'm also recommending you for the Distinguished Flying Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat operations. You'll carry both, the reprimand and the medal, a permanent reminder that you did something necessary and brave, but outside the rules." He closed the folder. "Captain Donovan, military aviation needs pilots with your courage and skill, but it also needs discipline. You've proven you have the first. I hope you never forget the second." Dismissed. 6 months later, Captain Rachel Donovan was still flying Blackhawks with the 161st Special Operations Aviation Regiment, though everyone now knew her as the pilot who defied command and saved 300 soldiers. Her career advancement had stalled completely. The reprimand in her record guaranteed she'd never make major or lead a unit, but the distinguished flying cross on her chest told another story. At the award ceremony, Colonel Dean Mercer himself had pinned the medal on her uniform and simply said, "You gave 300 families their loved ones back. Thank you." Rachel returned to duty soon after, still flying high-risk operations in hostile zones. Her experience and nerve were too valuable to sideline, reprimand or not. Other pilots started seeking her mentorship, eager to learn from the woman who'd proven that courage sometimes means doing what's right, even when it breaks every rule in the book. A year after the Valmore Ridge incident, Rachel was leading a classroom briefing for new night stalker pilots. During the Q&A, a young pilot raised her hand. "Ma'am, everyone knows the story, how you flew into that kill zone against orders. How did you decide to do it? How did you know it was the right call?" Rachel paused, choosing her words with care. "I didn't know for sure," she said. "I just knew that 300 soldiers were going to die if no one acted, and I had both the helicopter and the training to make a difference. So I had to choose between following orders or saving lives. When you put it that way, it's not a hard choice. It's just terrifying, because you live with the consequences." The young pilot frowned. "But ma'am, you ended your career. Was it worth it?" Rachel smiled faintly. "I fly Blackhawks for a living. I get to do what I love every day." "I get to do what I love every day," Captain Rachel Donovan said, her voice calm but resolute. "I'll never command a unit or make general, but that's a small price compared to what those 300 soldiers and their families would have lost if I'd followed orders and stayed grounded." Another trainee raised his hand. "Ma'am, do you regret disobeying orders?" Rachel paused. "I regret that it had to come to that," she admitted. "I wish the system had been flexible enough to authorize what needed to be done when it needed to happen. But no, I don't regret my decision. Those soldiers deserved a pilot willing to risk everything to bring them home. That's what we're here for." 300 soldiers had been trapped deep behind enemy lines, outnumbered 7-1, running out of ammo, seconds from annihilation, while command refused to authorize air support because the anti-aircraft threat made extraction too dangerous. That day, Captain Rachel Donovan made her choice. She climbed into her Black Hawk, ignored explicit orders to remain grounded, and flew straight into the kill zone. Because sometimes following the rules means watching good people die when you have the power to save them. She flew through enemy fire from all directions, evaded multiple missiles, and pulled 15 critically wounded soldiers from certain death, those who would have never made it if she had waited for authorization. Her career advancement ended that day with a letter of reprimand burned into her record. But 300 soldiers went home instead of dying in a foreign battlefield. Rachel accepted that trade without hesitation and without regret, because some duties outweigh regulation, and true courage is doing what's right, even when everyone tells you it's wrong. Thanks for watching. Every woman has a story worth telling. Join us for more on Major Tom's Tales.